At Christmas dinner, I served the meal, refilled plates, and smiled through every passive-aggressive comment. As I sat down, my aunt looked me dead in the eye and said, "You should be used to being left out by now. It's what you've always been at." My cousin laughed. No one defended me. I didn't cry. I just got up quietly and texted my lawyer to cancel the condo transfer they all thought was a given. I, 32M, thought I had finally found my place in this family. After years of being the outsider, the one who never quite fit in, I believed things were different now. I was wrong. The smell of roasted turkey filled my childhood home as I carried the heavy platter from the kitchen to the dining room. Steam rose from the golden skin, and I felt a familiar knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Christmas dinner at my parents' house had always been a performance, but this year felt different. This year, I had something they all wanted. My aunt sat at the head of the table like she owned the place, which in her mind, she probably did. She'd been the family matriarch since my grandmother passed, making decisions and passing judgments with the authority of someone who'd never been questioned. My cousin sat beside her, scrolling through his phone with that same entitled smirk he'd worn since we were kids. My parents flanked the other end, my mother fussing over the table settings while my father carved the ham with mechanical precision. I set the turkey down and stepped back, waiting for someone to acknowledge the effort. The silence stretched until my mother finally commented that it looked nice. My aunt barely glanced up from her wine glass. The meal began with the usual small talk. My cousin bragged about his new promotion at the marketing firm where nepotism had landed him 3 years ago. My aunt nodded approvingly and mentioned how proud she was of his success. My parents chimed in with their own praise, and I found myself refilling water glasses just to have something to do with my hands. When the conversation turned to my work at the tech startup, the energy shifted. My aunt asked if I was still playing around with computers, her tone suggesting I was wasting my time with finger paints. I explained that we'd just secured Series B funding and were expanding internationally, but she'd already moved on to asking my cousin about his vacation plans. I excused myself to get more wine from the kitchen, taking longer than necessary to compose myself. Through the doorway, I could hear them discussing the family cabin in Vermont, making plans for next summer without including me. It was nothing new, but it still stung. Back at the table, I served the side dishes and refilled plates without being asked. My mother had trained me well in the art of invisible service. I smiled when my aunt made a comment about the potatoes being too salty, even though I'd followed my grandmother's recipe exactly. I nodded when my cousin suggested I should try dating apps since I was still single at 32, as if my relationship status was somehow their business. The passive-aggressive comments came in waves. My aunt mentioned how nice it was that some people had time to cook elaborate meals, implying I had nothing better to do. My cousin wondered aloud if I ever planned to settle down and have a real career, not just these startup experiments. My parents said nothing, their silence more cutting than any words. I kept serving, kept smiling, kept playing the role they'd assigned me decades ago. The family disappointment. The one who tried too hard. The outsider who would never quite belong. As I finally sat down with my own plate, my aunt fixed me with that look I remembered from childhood. Her eyes were cold and calculating. The same expression she'd worn when she'd convinced my parents to send me to public school while my cousin went private. When she'd suggested I wasn't college material. When she'd made it clear that some family members mattered more than others. She told me I should be used to being left out by now, that it was what I'd always been good at. The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. My cousin laughed, that same cruel sound from when we were kids, and he'd break my toys just to watch me cry. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say something, anything, in my defense. The silence was deafening. My parents stared at their plates. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine, but she didn't speak. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. They'd made their choice long ago, and it wasn't me. I didn't cry. I'd learned years ago that tears only gave them more ammunition. Instead, I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages, scrolling to my lawyer's contact. The message was simple: cancel the condo transfer. Effective immediately. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The room had gone quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the kitchen speaker. My aunt was staring at me with confusion, probably wondering why I wasn't running to the bathroom to sob like I used to. My cousin asked what I was doing, his voice uncertain for the first time all evening. I told them I was texting my lawyer about the downtown condo I'd been planning to transfer to the family trust, the one they'd all been counting on for their retirement plans. The color drained from my aunt's face. She'd been the one to suggest the trust arrangement 6 months ago, painting it as a way to keep family assets together. What she hadn't known was that I'd been planning to gift them the property outright, a gesture worth about $2 million in the current market. My cousin's phone clattered to the table. He stammered something about not understanding, asking if this was some kind of joke. I assured him it wasn't. The transfer documents that were supposed to be signed next week would not be happening. My mother finally found her voice, asking why I would do such a thing. I looked at her, this woman who'd given birth to me but never really defended me, and told her she should ask her sister. After all, she'd just reminded me what I'd always been good at. My father demanded to know what I meant, his voice rising for the first time all evening. I explained that I'd always been good at being left out, at being the family disappointment, at being the one who didn't matter. So I was going to excel at it. The condo would be sold. The proceeds would go to charity. They could figure out their own retirement plans. My aunt tried to backtrack, claiming she'd been joking, that family was family, and we all said things we didn't mean. But her words rang hollow after 32 years of the same treatment. My cousin attempted to smooth things over, suddenly interested in my life and my feelings, asking if we could talk about this reasonably. I told them there was nothing to discuss. The decision was made. My mother started crying, asking how I could be so cruel, how I could hurt the family like this. The irony wasn't lost on me. 32 years of their cruelty, and I was the one being accused of hurting the family. I walked to the coat closet and pulled on my jacket. My aunt called after me, her voice desperate now, asking where I was going. I told her I was going home to my apartment, the one I'd bought with my own money from my computer games. My cousin jumped up, blocking my path to the door. He tried to reason with me, explaining that we were family and family forgave each other. He suggested we could work this out, maybe have a conversation about boundaries and respect. I looked at him, this man who'd tormented me for decades and was now panicking about his inheritance, and told him he was right about family forgiving each other. That's why I was forgiving them for 32 years of making me feel worthless. But forgiveness didn't mean I had to keep enabling their behavior. My father stood up, his face red with anger. He told me I was being childish, that one comment didn't justify destroying the family's financial security. I reminded him that it wasn't one comment. It was a lifetime of comments, of being excluded, of being treated like a burden they had to tolerate. My aunt tried a different approach, appealing to my grandmother's memory. She said my grandmother would have wanted the family to stay together, to support each other. I agreed that my grandmother would have wanted that. She also would have wanted her family to treat each other with love and respect, something they'd failed to do. The room erupted in arguments. My mother accused my aunt of ruining everything with her sharp tongue. My father blamed my cousin for laughing at the comment. My cousin pointed fingers at everyone else, claiming he'd just been following their lead. My aunt insisted she'd been misunderstood, that her words had been taken out of context. I watched them turn on each other with the same viciousness they'd always reserved for me, and I felt nothing but relief. This was who they really were when their comfortable dynamics were threatened. I opened the front door, and the cold December air hit my face like freedom. My aunt made one last desperate plea, asking what it would take to fix this. I told her it was too late for fixes. Some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. My cousin followed me onto the porch, his breath visible in the frigid air. He begged me to reconsider, promising things would be different, that they'd include me more, treat me better. I asked him why it had taken the threat of losing $2 million for him to care about my feelings. He had no answer. I drove home through empty streets, Christmas lights blinking in windows where other families were probably having normal celebrations. Families where love wasn't conditional on financial benefit, where belonging didn't require enduring abuse. Update 1. The call started the next morning. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everyone wanted to check on me, to make sure I was okay, to remind me how much they loved me. My uncle, my aunt's ex-husband, called to apologize for his family's behavior. He'd heard about the dinner from my cousin and wanted me to know that not everyone agreed with how I'd been treated. It was touching, but also telling that he'd never spoken up before when it might have mattered. My mother left voicemails alternating between guilt trips and genuine apologies. She wanted to meet for coffee, to talk things through, to understand why I was so angry. I appreciated the effort, but 32 years of understanding had led to this moment. My father sent text messages about family loyalty and forgiveness, about not letting emotions drive permanent decisions. He suggested we could set up a payment plan for the condo, as if this was about money rather than respect. My aunt showed up at my apartment building on Tuesday morning. The doorman called up to ask if I wanted to see her, and I told him no. She waited in the lobby for 3 hours before finally leaving. She returned Wednesday and Thursday with the same result. My cousin tried a different approach, reaching out through mutual friends and former classmates. He painted himself as the victim of his mother's influence, claiming he'd always wanted a better relationship with me, but hadn't known how to break the family patterns. I blocked their numbers and changed my locks, though none of them had keys anyway. The lawyer confirmed that the condo transfer had been officially canceled. The property would go on the market after the holidays, with proceeds designated for a scholarship fund I was establishing for first-generation college students. My grandmother would have approved. Update 2. 3 weeks later, my mother showed up at my office. She'd somehow convinced the receptionist that it was a family emergency, and I found her sitting in the conference room looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She apologized without excuses or justifications. She acknowledged that she'd failed to protect me, that she'd chosen the path of least resistance instead of standing up for her son. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to change my mind about the condo. She just wanted me to know that she was sorry. It was the conversation I'd needed for decades, but it came too late to change anything. I thanked her for coming and told her I appreciated her honesty. She asked if there was any chance we could rebuild our relationship, and I told her I didn't know. Some damage took time to assess. She left her contact information and promised not to pressure me for a response. It was the most respect she'd ever shown me. My father never apologized. Instead, he hired a lawyer to explore whether the condo transfer could be legally challenged. The lawyer quickly informed him that I had every right to dispose of my property as I saw fit, and that any attempt to contest it would be frivolous. My aunt's behavior became increasingly erratic. She showed up at my gym, my grocery store, and my favorite restaurant, always with the same desperate energy. She'd approach other patrons, explaining that I was her nephew and asking them to convince me to talk to her. The restaurant manager eventually banned her from the premises. My cousin took to social media, posting vague messages about family betrayal and greed. He never mentioned me by name, but the context was clear to anyone who knew our family. Several mutual friends reached out to ask what was happening, and I simply told them it was a private family matter. The condo sold in February for above asking price. The scholarship fund was established with a local university, focusing on students from dysfunctional family backgrounds who'd overcome significant obstacles to pursue higher education. The first recipient would be announced in the fall. Update 3. 6 months after that Christmas dinner, I received an unexpected call from my cousin's ex-wife. They'd divorced 3 years earlier, but she'd heard about the family drama through their shared custody arrangements. She wanted to thank me. She explained that my cousin had been counting on his inheritance from the family trust to avoid paying proper child support for their daughter. He'd been hiding assets and claiming financial hardship while planning to receive millions from the condo transfer. My decision to cancel the transfer had exposed his deception to the family court. Her lawyer had used the information to secure a much better support arrangement for their daughter. My cousin would now be paying what he actually owed, based on his real income rather than his fabricated poverty. She also shared something that put my aunt's behavior in perspective. Apparently, my aunt had been borrowing against the expected condo transfer for months, taking out loans and making investments based on money she didn't yet have. My decision had left her financially exposed, explaining her desperate attempts to change my mind. The family's financial house of cards was collapsing, and they were all scrambling to cover their positions. What I'd thought was about respect and belonging had actually been about money all along. My mother and I had been meeting for coffee once a month. The conversations were stilted at first, but gradually became more natural. She was seeing a therapist to work through her own family dynamics and patterns of conflict avoidance. She didn't ask about reconciling with the rest of the family, understanding that bridge had been permanently burned. My father eventually stopped trying to contact me. His lawyer had confirmed there was no legal recourse, and his pride prevented him from making the kind of genuine apology that might have opened a dialogue. My aunt's harassment escalated to the point where I had to file a restraining order. The judge granted it immediately after reviewing the evidence of her stalking behavior. She was required to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. My cousin's social media posts became increasingly bitter and unhinged. He blamed me for his divorce, his financial problems, and his strained relationship with his daughter. He seemed unable to accept that his own choices had consequences. The scholarship fund awarded its first grant to a young woman who'd aged out of foster care and was working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school. She sent me a handwritten thank you note that I kept on my desk as a reminder that some good had come from all the pain. I started dating someone I'd met through work, a woman who came from a loving, supportive family. When I told her about my own family situation, she was horrified but not surprised. She'd seen similar dynamics in her work as a social worker and understood that blood relation didn't guarantee love or loyalty. Meeting her family was a revelation. They disagreed with each other, had different opinions and personalities, but they treated each other with fundamental respect. No one was the designated scapegoat or family disappointment. Conflicts were addressed directly rather than through passive-aggressive comments and exclusion. For the first time, I understood what a healthy family looked like. A year after that Christmas dinner, I received a letter from my aunt. It had been forwarded through my lawyer since she couldn't contact me directly due to the restraining order. She'd written a long apology, acknowledging her behavior and asking for a chance to make amends. The letter was well written and seemed sincere, but it came too late. Some wounds don't heal, and some relationships can't be repaired. I'd spent too many years hoping for change that never came. I filed the letter away and moved on with my life. The second scholarship recipient was a young man who'd been homeless for 2 years while finishing high school. He was studying computer science and reminded me of myself at that age, hungry for knowledge and desperate to prove his worth. His thank you email mentioned that the scholarship had allowed him to quit one of his 3 jobs and focus on his studies. My girlfriend and I moved in together, creating our own chosen family with friends who valued and supported each other. We hosted dinner parties where everyone was welcome, where conversation flowed naturally, where no one kept score of who contributed what. It was everything my family gatherings had never been. 2 years later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that my aunt had declared bankruptcy. My cousin had moved back in with his parents after losing his apartment. My father's business was struggling, partly due to the economic downturn, but also because of poor decisions made while counting on money that never materialized. I felt no satisfaction in their misfortune, but I also felt no guilt about my role in it. They'd made their choices long before that Christmas dinner, treating me as expendable while planning to profit from my success. The consequences were theirs to bear. My mother and I continued our monthly coffee meetings. Our relationship would never be what it might have been if she'd protected me as a child, but it was honest now in a way it had never been before. She'd accepted that her choices had costs, and she was working to become the person she wished she'd been all along. The scholarship fund had grown beyond my initial contribution, attracting donations from others who'd experienced similar family dynamics. We'd helped dozens of students pursue their education despite difficult circumstances, proving that sometimes the best revenge is living well and lifting others as you climb. I never went back to another family Christmas dinner. Instead, I created new traditions with people who chose to love me rather than tolerate me. People who celebrated my successes instead of resenting them. People who understood that family isn't just about blood, but about how you treat each other when no one is watching. That Christmas dinner had been the end of one story and the beginning of another. The family I was born into had taught me what I didn't want. The family I chose taught me what was possible. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value you, even when they share your DNA. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable toxic behavior, even when it costs you financially. I learned that respect isn't something you can buy with generosity or earn through service. It's something you demand by setting boundaries and enforcing consequences when those boundaries are crossed. My aunt was wrong about what I'd always been good at. I wasn't good at being left out. I was good at surviving, at building something better from the wreckage of what came before. And in the end, that made all the difference.